Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be concentrating on Act 1, Scene 2 of Othello by William Shakespeare. So, let's get involved. Iago shares at the start of this scene his worry with his boss Othello. As the audience we realise this isn't genuine worry. Iago claims he's worried that Brabantio will inform the Senate of Othello's marriage to Desdemona, that Othello will get sent to jail and that his marriage will be annulled. Othello, however, rationalises why he's a great match for Desdemona and seems a much more sensible gentleman than we were led to believe in Act 1, Scene 1. Cassio arrives and informs Othello of the Duke's need to see him urgently at the Venetian state. We assume as the audience that he may in fact be in trouble for what he's done by marrying Desdemona. On the way, Othello then meets a furious Brabantio, Desdemona's father, and asks for all men to put their swords down. When Othello asks for all men to put their swords down, this is really him showing kindness. He's a strong man, and an old, out-of-shape gentleman has offered to fight him. He's asking for peace because he knows he's great at fighting, and he wants to be much more civil than that. We understand there's a humanity in Othello by that decision. Brabantio doesn't stop with just asking to fight. He accuses Othello of using enchantment on his daughter, that witchcraft and wizardry must have been used. And he heads on to see the Duke himself to inform the Duke of exactly what Othello's crimes are. So, how would you direct this scene? It's a great question to ask ourselves with every scene that we're looking at. When Othello speaks in this scene, we learn of his integrity and his sincere love for Desdemona. Many versions show him confident and owning the presence of encountering his now father-in-law. But how could you choose to stage it? It's interesting to consider what Carol Phillips says. She considers that Othello is this man of action. He's not a thinker, and that his words actually reflect his isolation as a black man in a very white world. I don't know whether that could be incorporated into how we staged it, but it's important to consider from the beginning of this play that when we first meet Othello, he's isolated then. So how does the drama unfold in this specific scene? We meet Othello in this scene and we see the blurring of what is his personal life with his public life. And it echoes the same theme of the blurring of the lines between personal and public that we met in Act 1, Scene 1. Othello is clearly an exceptional warrior, but he is now on rocky ground with his father-in-law Brabantio regarding marriage to Desdemona. But it's interesting to note that Othello uses diplomacy and sounds authoritative when dealing with Brabantio, as if it's a battle demanding they shield their bright swords. Although his integrity has been attacked, he does nothing but show pride in what his principles are. That is a mark of a great man. Shakespeare makes it clear that Othello is not the egocentric and pompous man that Iago described to the audience and offered quite crudely to us in Act 1, Scene 1. We now know for certain we must not trust Iago, just as he told us we mustn't. Does Shakespeare do this to foster in the audience some favour towards Othello as a decent man? Do we need to know he is such a decent man in order to really buy into the events that follow in this play? We could condemn him, Brabantio, like the incredulous Brabantio, or see him as a victim already, much like Phillips suggests by her critique of him as a black man isolated in a very white world. So what language does Shakespeare use in this scene to accentuate what messages we should be taking from it? It's interesting weighing up the contrast between how Othello speaks within this scene. He refers to marriage as circumscription and confine, which seems bleak and hopeless here. He seems instead much more comfortable considering negotiating peace with Brabantio when he says, "Keep up your bright swords, for the dew will rust them." That sounds suave and sophisticated. He also says, "Were it my cue to fight, I should have known it." sounds utterly confident as the warrior and the man that he is. Shakespeare also tactically uses blank verse when depicting and portraying Othello's words, which affirms he is calm, measured, and commands respect. This is in huge contrast to Iago, who is signalled, as we already know by now, as the lewd misogynist, in contrast to Othello, when he quips with Cassio that he hath boarded a land carrack. When he says he tonight hath boarded a land carrack, that metaphor is simultaneously degrading Desdemona to a prostitute, in crude slang of the time, or considering a treasure ship. Now, whichever way we read this comment about what Othello has done that evening, Desdemona is either a possession and a prostitute, and Othello is simply a trespasser. It suggests that Iago has very little in terms of his own moral compass and has very little regard for the man that he claimed he was worried for at the start of the scene. Brabantio shows his disgust as well, with some very overt, alarming and dehumanising words. Would ever have run from her guardage to the sooty bosom of such a thing as thou, to fear, not delight. So there's a semantic field here of racism. Sooty as a word, referring to colour, seems crude to us in the 21st century now. But this idea that Brabantio is so delusional that he uses the sentiment that Desdemona must be terrified, to fear, not delight. And he's incredulous, would ever have. He cannot believe this could have been done in any other way, except, of course, through magic and superstition. And this is the other thing he chooses to use here. He uses the semantic field of magic and superstition in his words to convey his dismay that Desdemona has been a victim. He says, "Thou hast practised on her with foul charms, abused her delicate youth with drugs or minerals that weaken motion." It's as if this is the only logic that Brabantio can work through. And he's already come across as quite an irrational and erratic man from his actions in Act 1, Scene 1, actually, when he claims it's not unlike his dream that Desdemona would do such a thing as marry aside. But now he believes that it's foul charms, that his daughter has been abused, that drugs or minerals that weaken motion have taken hold of her. He cannot legitimise that this could be a genuine match in marriage. So what are our takeaways from Act 1, Scene 2 on our whistle-stop tour? We meet Othello. We see Brabantio square up to Othello and legitimise his belief that magic must have been used on his daughter. We learn that Othello seems sincere about his love for Desdemona and seems like a gentleman. We meet Cassio and we realise he's trustworthy too. It's ironic though, as later in this play, Cassio will be framed for being a womanizer. The most harrowing thing about this scene is realising the duplicitous nature of Iago is exactly what he'd pledged in Act 1, Scene 1. The stage is set. We understand our tragic hero is about to have a fall. And under these conditions, it's a question of wanting to know exactly what goes on at court. And that is where Act 1, Scene 3 comes in. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?